Hi, my name is Roberta Jones, and I look at the past to see into the future.
Today, I invite you to take a trip back in time, but also to look at the present with new eyes by exploring a work that has spanned the centuries, Leda and the Swan. On the surface, it's just a woman holding a swan in her arms, trying to protect it from a threatening eagle. But if we pause for a moment, something doesn't add up. What lies behind this seemingly simple scene? What does it tell us today about our bodies and the power that flows through them? Leda and the Swan is not just an ancient myth, but a motif that appears in many galleries, both here in Rome and elsewhere in Europe. The disturbing photographs of Francesca Woodman also have Leda as subject, and its echo resounds in the Me Too movement. When we think about the gaze in art, ambiguous desire, and the delicate issue of consent. So, what remains of Leda in the 21st century, and why has rape been so often depicted as something normal in art history? It is a subject that touches us, provokes us, and forces us to reflect on how, even today, the body and power are intertwined. Let's start with the myth. Pretending to be pursued by an eagle, the swan, who is actually Zeus, king of the gods, takes refuge in the arms of Leda, queen of Sparta. And this is where things get complicated because there are several variations of the myth. In some versions, Zeus seduces Leda. In others, he rapes her. In others still, Leda consents, influenced by divine powers. As if it weren't enough, that night, Leda also had intercourse with her husband, King Tyndareus. Afterwards, she laid 2 eggs. Yes, I know this sounds crazy, but remember that she had had sex with a swan earlier in the day. Anyway, 2 sets of twins hatched from the eggs. The children of Zeus were Pollux and Helen, who later became the famous Helen of Troy. Leda's husband's children were Castor and Clytemnestra, who went down in history for the murder of her husband, Agamemnon. From these premises, it is clear that the myth of Leda is a complex web of ambiguity. From an art history perspective, Leda is one of the most erotic and, at the same time, most contradictory images that has fascinated artists since ancient times. It combines seduction, divinity, metamorphosis, and power. These 4 themes reveal the dark side of the myth behind the apparent beauty of the artistic representation. In the Renaissance, in particular, myth was a golden key. It opened the doors of desire without breaking the bounds of decency. Leda and the Swan was the ideal subject. Behind the mask of classical culture, it allowed the female body, its form, movement, and eroticism to be explored without falling into religious censorship. The scene is suspended between abandonment and resistance. Violence is veiled in grace. Seduction is disguised as allegory. Leda is therefore a testing ground, a pretext for experimenting with daring poses, drapery and twists, but also for questioning the very essence of desire. Leonardo da Vinci devoted himself to the subject for a long time, perhaps fascinated by the enigma of female pleasure and the mystery of generation. Eggs, mythological children, and metamorphosis. Today, all that remains are the preparatory drawings for a painting that, if it was ever completed, has been lost. Michelangelo exaggerates the physical tension with an overemphasis on the muscular features of the bodies. His version of Leda and Swan at the National Gallery in London shows a statuesque woman. The artist has painted her skin as if it were marble, clear and smooth, as she embraces the swan and kisses it on the beak. There is no expressiveness or resistance, only quiet acceptance. On the other hand, Correggius's work in the Gemäldegalerie Gallery in Berlin shows a softer, more enveloping sensuality. The painting has a very well-defined narrative structure. The artist portrays the scene in 3 distinct stages, representing the before, during, and after of the coupling. In the painting of Veronese, all ambiguity disappears. It is in the palace of Fesch, Ajaccio in Corsica, and dates back to 1585. The painting shows Leda reclining on a bed completely naked, with a backdrop of rich material that looks like theatre curtains, holding the swan between her legs as she sensually licks its beak. The scene does not allude, it clearly shows. The painting becomes a powerful allegory of the fusion between human and divine, between body and spirit, and between nature and the supernatural. It's all a matter of convention. Veronese was tried for heresy when he painted a parrot near Christ. Few people know that in artistic tradition, the parrot was often associated with female orgasm. Yet, a naked woman making love to a swan was perfectly acceptable, since the subject is profane. The mythological alibi is a passport to all sorts of freedom, both in terms of execution of the work and its interpretation. Some art historians have gone so far as to see, in the various central representations of Leda and the swan, not an allegory of desire between man and woman, but rather an allegory of female masturbation. Because, after all, a swan is just an ugly duckling. This diversity of interpretations is also reflected in the works you can admire in Rome. Come with me to Villa Farnesina to discover a fresco attributed to Raphael in the Loggia di Galatea. It depicts Leda and the swan within a refined cycle inspired by classical myths. It is a rather chaste version. For once, Leda is dressed, covered with large pieces of fabric, giving the swan what appears to be an innocent kiss, while the eggs are hatching to reveal 2 of the 4 children born from the double union. The composition is harmonious and balanced, immersed in a Renaissance ideal of grace and perfection. But we could go to see the Roman sculpture on display at the Borghese Gallery, dated to the 2nd century AD, which has a completely different tone. Here, Leda appears in a protective pose, trying to save the swan from the attack of an eagle. It is a scene full of tension, more earthly than mythological, which transforms the legend into a human gesture of defense. The fact is that, for centuries, Leda and the swan remained an exercise in style, an obsessive variation on desire disguised as myth. Even in the greatest masterpieces of the subject, the image never really questioned the boundaries of classical beauty. The artistic representation of the myth, from Michelangelo to Dali, has almost always concealed aggression beneath a veil of sensuality. However, in the second half of the 20th century, something snapped. Artists such as C. Twombly, but above all Francesca Woodman, no longer represented the body in a realistic way, instead evoking the primitive power of myth, tension, and unconscious memory. They used it to express what could not be said before: violence, gender as a mask, and beauty as a cage. And so they challenged art to look at itself in the mirror. The advent of psychoanalysis certainly contributed to this beginning of freedom of speech and renewed focus on the female body. The scene is no longer just erotic, but also disturbing, becoming a metaphor for desire, understood as a loss of control. Leda is no longer perfect beauty. She is in turn the victim, the protagonist, and the enigma of desire. Let's turn to Francesca Woodman, an American photographer born in 1958. She's often referred to as the Rimbaud of photography, brilliant, intense, and gone too soon, having committed suicide at the age of 23. During her studies in Rome, she absorbed classical art and reworked it in her own personal way. In her shots, the body, almost always her own, appears fragile, elusive, and restless. Woodman takes classical aesthetics and subverts it. Ideal beauty gives way to instability, disappearance, the desire to escape the gaze. Her Leda is not a muse, but a presence struggling to reclaim her body and her voice. During her stay in Rome, Woodman came into contact with classical and Baroque art, with sculptures by Bernini and Borromini, ancient ruins, and with a city that lives in constant tension between beauty and decay. This experience had a profound effect on her work, adding a new awareness to her images. Places such as the non-Catholic cemetery and the dilapidated interiors of historic buildings became her favorite settings. In 1977, back in the United States, Woodman took the photograph Lucy with Goose, which refers directly to the myth of Leda. Taken from the series Swan in 1978, the photograph is a contemporary reworking of the myth. We see a partially hidden body, which appears like a fragment of time. The face is not visible, but in the darkness we can see the woman's white dress and her hand resting on the bird's beak, as if caressing it. In the peaceful silence of the image, there remains a sense of something unsaid. Her photographs, after all, are not expositions, but concealments. She does not simply show herself. Rather, she claims the right to disappear, to merge with her surroundings. In this way, Woodman, like Leda, is no longer just an object of gaze, but a figure who takes control of her own narrative. In the myth, Leda is both a desired and violated body, mother and victim, an ambiguous figure who generates both beauty and war in the form of her daughter who was to become Helen of Troy, and mortality and immortality in the form of her sons Castor and Pollux. Only Pollux, the son of Zeus, was immortal. When Castor died, Pollux was so grief-stricken that he asked Zeus to let him share his immortality with his brother. Zeus placed them both in the sky as the constellation Gemini, as a symbol of their brotherly bond. In this sense, Leda can be reinterpreted as an icon of reappropriation, a metaphor for the female body that ceases to be a passive surface and becomes an active subject. Reinterpreting Leda today does not mean joining a cancel culture and removing anything that does not correspond to our modern gaze, but rather giving her back her voice, her gestures, and her choices. In this new reading, Leda becomes the symbol of a subjectivity that questions itself, that does not accept the destiny written for her by gods, men, or artists. It is in this ambiguity that her contemporary power lies. This is even more true if we consider the body in our modern world, increasingly mediated by technology. As in the myth of Leda, where the woman's body is forced to undergo a violent and sudden transformation. Today, the body, especially the female body, is often subject to manipulation, both through images and through the intervention of technology. In this scenario, with the advent of artificial intelligence and augmented reality, the question, who owns the gaze, takes on even greater significance. The gaze, once a tool for personal experience and introspection, is now the result of algorithms and digital media that manipulate our perception of reality. Just as in the myth of Leda, where the protagonist's body becomes the site of invisible violence, today the body in technology is continuously filtered and shaped according to imposed logic. In mythology, Leda symbolizes a body that loses control of its own narrative. She undergoes an unexpected transformation, becoming, through her encounter with the swan, a victim of an external will. Yet, in her figure, there also lies the possibility of reclaiming her own space and identity, as Francesca Woodman's example has shown us. Leda becomes a metaphor for a body seeking to reclaim its own narrative. The body is no longer a simple passive object, but a territory of struggle and reappropriation. An endless search for freedom in which the narrative of the body passes from suffering to the ability to tell its own story.